Alright, welcome back. And this is part 2. We are going to go into rectangles. Um, so we can draw rectangles and do special things with these rectangles. Now, in rectangles, if you got to think about what you want the rectangles to do. If you have one rectangle on the screen, sure you want it to draw and all that stuff. But that is, we can set the drawing code in it or somewhere else, but we're gonna worry about the interactions of rectangles. When you have a rectangle, you want to tell whether your mouse is inside of it or whether your mouse is outside of it. Well, you don't really want to tell that. You just mainly want to tell if it's inside, and you want to also tell if two rectangles collide with each other. If they intersect or anything happens, you want to return a value and say the rectangles are colliding. So let's start by a rectangle structure. We want an X, we want a Y, we want a width, and we want a height of our rectangle. I always put this terminator at the end of my functions, my objects, because when I compress it, it causes errors if it's not there. So, first thing we want to do is error handling. Sure, you can press F12 and like Google Chrome, or you can look at Firebug and see error reports, but you want custom error reports for some specific things. So we'll go over a little bit of that. So when somebody creates this rectangle, you want to, it must have an X, it must have a Y, it must have a width, and must have a height. You can have it automatically set those, but in our case, we want it to have it no matter what, because that's just the way we want it. We don't ever want a rectangle of 0 width and 0 height. So let's start with some simple checks. We want to check if X is null, or Y is null, or the width is null, or the height is null. So this if statement will check if any one of those variables are null. If so, we want to alert. You don't have to alert if you're going to use an error throw, which we'll also use. We'll do both just to show. We want to alert the person and say, you did not pass all the required variables. X, Y, width, height. Okay, now we also want to say an error message. We can make the error message really fancy and say, make a string and say var err our MSG as our variable, and we'll just do it. The following was not provided, and we want to put a colon. Now we want to check if X is equal to null, error message plus equals, let's say X, if Y is equal to null, error message plus equals Y. If the width was equal to null, error message plus equals width. If height is equal to null, error message plus equals height. So now we check against all that stuff to make sure that it's there, and then we want to say throw new error message. That'll throw it inside of the console. So if you have the console open or the Firebug console open, you'll see that error message appear if you don't insert it X, Y, width, or height. Now we want to set the main variables of this rectangle, this being the keyword because it's object oriented. This dot Y is equal to Y, this dot width is equal to W, and this dot height is equal to H. So now we have our X, Y, width, and height set up. Now we want to write a function. Let's start off with an easier function. Let's start off with the contains function to see if it contains a certain x and y value. This dot contains equals function x, y. So we want to ask if x is greater than or equal to this dot x, and y, or x is less than or equal to this dot x plus this dot width. Now, I will explain this logic in a minute. Then we want to say if y is greater than or equal to this dot y, and y is less than or equal to this dot y plus this dot height. Yes. If so, we want to return true, else return false. So basically this function, when we call it on the rectangle and we say contains and we pass the x and the y value, it checks and sees if x is greater than x. Say that, let's just do a little diagram here. Here's our rectangle. Not a very good looking rectangle, but a rectangle nonetheless. There we go. So here's our rectangle. Now if the point on the x is over here, on this side of the rectangle, then it's outside of the rectangle. So what we need is the x position to be greater than the rectangle's x position. So we need it to be over here somewhere, or over here somewhere, somewhere to the that is greater than its x position, which is right here. So now we know that the x is in the correct place. Next, we want to make sure that it's less than the width, because we don't want it to be greater than the x. X is here, and this x is greater than the x, but we don't want it to be greater than the x plus the width, which gives us this bounds. So now that we have this bounds, it's checking if the x is greater than the x and the x is less than the x is the rectangle's x plus its width. So it's inside there. Same thing for the y. I don't really need to explain it all. The y is the same thing. Make sure it's greater than its y, which is right here, so we want it somewhere down here, and less than the y plus the height. So we want it somewhere in here. That will check if that x and y is within this rectangle. And that is the logic behind that. Sorry for just interrupting there. This video is getting to be longer than I thought, so I will just go ahead and finish the video here and continue the next part, because the next part's a little bit long for intersecting and explaining how it works. So see that